A primary responsibility of the Secret Service is to protect the president and former presidents. WIFR reporter Anthony Ferretti talks with a local former state representative and FBI special agent on what goes into protecting the commander-in-chief.
The U.S. Secret Service handles the initial investigation, but once it's determined there's an attack on the president's life or any other official, then it becomes an investigative matter for the FBI.
It was close enough for anyone with a high-powered rifle could get a shot at the president. How could that have been missed?
Jim Seisha worked as an FBI special agent for almost 3 decades. He says he feared an assassination attempt on a president or former president like what happened to Donald Trump Saturday in Pennsylvania.
The reason I did fear it is there has been such an increased tempo of anger on both sides of the political spectrum, or so it seems.
Seisha says he knows the Secret Service did its initial surveillance and went through all the criteria to ensure Trump's safety. That was evident as agents swarmed him like they would have done with any other current or former president.
They run to the scene of the crime. They run into the danger. And that's what Secret Service, they're trained to take a bullet because the president is their job to protect.
With the Republican National Convention starting Monday in Milwaukee, Seisha says he's confident in the ability of local, state, and federal law enforcement to work together to ensure a safe convention for candidates and attendees.
This is going to be a true test of how well we continue to have the law enforcement professionals working together. And I have no doubt that they will be very professional.
Since the suspected shooter, Matthew Crooks Jr., is dead, Seisha says Crooks' phone and computer will be extremely valuable in finding a motive for his assassination attempt on former President Trump.
Thank you, Anthony. And Seisha adds they will search the suspect's home for clues and determine his contacts for those who would be supporting him. Investigators would also look at his social media posts to go back through his life.